Hello, Create Schools. Today we're going to look at Vietnamization. So what this is the last installment of the case study of the Vietnam War. And Vietnamization is returning the Vietnam War over to the Vietnamese. So let's just take a look and see how that happens. We now have a new president, Nixon. And so what he decides is that it was going to not work, that everything is happening very poorly. And so he says, okay, before we can turn Vietnam over to the Vietnamese, let's do one last strike. And he gives a huge bombing campaign of the Viet Cong, but it was unsuccessful. And the communism was spreading to Cambodia and everything in Cambodia and Laos, and everyone was really worried. But it was time that the Americans withdraw. We have so many people dying. We have such bad media, and such press, and the feelings of Americans are very low. And basically, the Americans just had underestimated how many people from South Vietnam wanted to become communist. Now, I chose this cartoon here. Just to let you know this. So the president that was doing this is Nixon, if you don't remember, and this actually is LBJ Johnson as the president here, and this one. So this is pre what's going on, but it says a lot about media. So in 1960s, an American president took the country to war on false pretenses. That was your Gulf of Tonkin. This is referring to that the Gulf of Tonkin was a lie, that it didn't really happen. We talked about that in a previous video, and that's Johnson holding that. When things went bad, rather than facing hard truth, the Secretary of Defense blamed the media for being too negative. So there's your Secretary of Defense there. I don't really don't remember his name, but they're blaming, media, if you weren't so negative, things would be better. And then the last one, the price for these policies was paid in blood by too many young soldiers, basically saying tons and tons and tons of soldiers have died. So it is time to get out. So what do we do? Pause here if you need to take these notes. Sorry I didn't pause in the first slide. So hopefully you did that. I'm sorry. So pause here if you need to get these notes, and meet me on the next slide. Okay, so here we have Vietnamization. It was a policy by Richard Nixon, who was the third president that we have in the Vietnam War. And here is roughly the exact same table that I always show you, but in a different form. Okay, so the policy was a way to end the U.S. involvement in the war. And they were going to train Southern Vietnamese forces and give them a greater role in fighting. So like I said, Nixon increased the bombing in North Vietnam. And during that time, Nixon started reducing the numbers of combat troops fighting. So here we've got 69, you can see. So one of those questions I'd always asked you is, or I asked you on a previous Pear Deck, is how many people, when was the peak? This actually is showing the peak of 68. Our book showed it somewhere between 68 to 70. Okay, and so again, it's okay if you don't have those memorized numbers memorized, just get an idea. Here actually is where Kennedy was beforehand. Here is Johnson increasing it up, and here will be Nixon coming down. I just thought this was a very appropriate cartoon or picture, real picture. I'm going home. That's what this is all about right now. Vietnamization, all of the GIs going home. So pause here if you need to take these notes, and I will go on to the next one. Okay, so after everyone had basically left, a ceasefire came on January 1973, and neither side could see a victory. So fighting was still happening, and then 2 years later, the war is totally ended. So the USA was totally withdrawn by 1973. So I was just seeing these notes actually are kind of non sequitur. I apologize about that. So basically by 73, The USA was totally withdrawn, but fighting was still happening. Then 2 years later, the war ended in 1975. Okay, so make sure you kind of clarify that in your notes. Like I say, I apologize. These seem to be non sequitur. I didn't read that until I'd read it again. So in 1973, fighting was still happening. 2 years later, the war ended in 1975. Okay, and by 1973, the USA was totally withdrawn. Once the USA was totally withdrawn, the North Vietnamese came in and captured Saigon, which was the capital of South Korea, or South Vietnam, sorry. And then in 75, the war ended. So this is the slow withdrawal of the USA, a lovely little cartoon. And this is depicting the crows. The crows would be symbolizing the communists picking over the scarecrow that was left. And how the scarecrow, we're just not even going to listen to the scarecrow anymore. We're just going to come in and ruin it. Because the scarecrow should be there to scare the crows away. Okay, pause here and take these notes. I'll move on to the next slide. So when the war ended, so it was a really big blow to the United States, and they were even more humiliated now. And then they set up, so this is after Vietnam. This kind of gives you an idea of what's happening after Vietnam. So then the next chapter we're going the next chapter we're going to look at is the Eastern European side. So we'll start all back over to the beginning of the Cold War and move forward, and then kind of join here later. So détente was set up by the U.S. leaders, and a détente is basically a strive for agreement with peace with the communists. Okay, so they said, okay, let's see what we can do with détente. Okay, and so détente is such a big, it's French word. So what are other words for détente? So a pause, a rapprochement, a truce, a reconciliation, easement, discharge, discharging, ceasefire, accord, and reprieve. So when we're talking about détente, that is what we're talking about. All of these relaxings of the confrontations between the U.S. and China. And this is during Nixon's time. So this is right after Vietnam. Here is Nixon. So they want to create a better relationship with China. China did not want to have a united Vietnam. So we're saying, okay, we kind of all agree. They want to increase trade with their own superpowers. Okay, so that didn't really help communism, but they're just going to increase trade with the superpowers. They wanted to reduce any tension done in Germany. And they wanted to have an agreement with the communists to try to avoid confrontation. Okay, so things were going well. Everything was kind of easing. Tension was bringing back. Okay, and so pause here. Our tension was dialing down. Pause here and take these notes, and then you can come on with me to the next slide. So then in 1980, the U.S. had a lot of confidence coming back, and Ronald Reagan becomes president. He ends détente. He says, oh, I don't want to be peaceful anymore. I really want to get in here and have a lot more. And so the U.S. The U.S. challenges the USSR, and they start a new arms race, and this arms race is called Star Wars. Okay, that is the time that Star Wars movies were coming out, so it was really a play on word between the movie and the race, the arms race, to get more. And of course, there your little. Hopefully, you guys recognize this as our Luke Skywalker, our good, and then our Darth Vader, the evil. So, number of warheads. I thought this was a very interesting thing in the United States and in Russia. So here's your USSR. And if you see, the U.S. was winning, was during a lot of the arms race. And then suddenly the USSR gets a peak. And please note, so right here is the ending of the Cold War that you don't know about yet. So right there at the peak, then it ends. It drastically decreases. So we do have, so here is your 1980, and that is why the Americans decide they better get more money, because of course, look, here the Russians are overtaking. Okay, that is the last slide in chapter 5 in the Vietnam War. You actually aren't going to be asked any questions over these last two slides, this one or the detente slide, but it is something very important to just keep in mind what is going on. After the Vietnam War, there was some kind of trying to release tension. And then when Reagan comes over in the 80s, there becomes a lot more go, go, go. We can make more. And then in 89, it ends. And you'll learn actually why it ends in 89 in chapter 6. Okay, so pause here. I'm going to stop the video. And so if you have any questions, let me know.